Change agents for peace. We talked about sustainability and the environment, and now we're going to get into the subject of peace. And Professor Virginia Kawagas is the coordinator of the Peace Education Program at the University for Peace. And talking about glasses, I'm not going to be able to say anything nice without my glasses. Virginia is a resident professor at the University for Peace and adjunct professor at the Faculty of Education, University of Alberta in Canada. She holds a doctorate degree in education in peace and development, a master's in educational management, and a bachelor's in education. She's a member of the Peace Education Commission of the International Peace Research Association, a life member of the World Council for Curriculum and Instruction, and founding editor of the International Journal of Curriculum and Instruction. She has extensive publication and teaching experience in peace education, development education, social justice education, human rights education, environment education, and multicultural education in both formal and non-formal modes. Welcome, Virginia.
Good afternoon, everyone. In 2012, during the World Conference of Women Religious, Sister Pat Farrell was asked, what would a prophetic response to the larger paradigm shift of our time look like? What would it look like? And she answered, I hope it would include both openness and critical thinking, while also inspiring hope. We can claim the future we desire and act from it now. And to do this takes the discipline of choosing where to focus our attention. If our brains, as neuroscience now suggests, take whatever we focus on as an invitation to make it happen, then the images and visions we live with matter a great deal. So we need to actively engage our imagination in shaping visions of the future. Nothing we do is insignificant. Even a very small conscious choice of courage or of conscience can contribute to the transformation of the whole. This kind of intentionality, what is known as active hope, it is both creative and prophetic. Close quote. My contribution to this afternoon's reflection on empowering agents for peace is drawn mainly from my experience in the social movements in the Philippines and from my academic orientation as a peace educator and peace researcher. The Philippines is the second largest archipelago in the world, and it is made up of more than 7,100 islands in the westernmost part of the Pacific. The Filipinos have been through more than 400 years of colonization by the Spaniards, the Americans, and occupation by the Japanese. But despite the debilitating influence of colonization, the Filipinos have survived these years of colonization and are now resilient, warm-hearted, and peace-loving people, as I would like to think so. In 1986, the Philippine People Power movement brought down the oppressive Marcos dictatorship. And we were able to install the first woman Filipino president, or actually the first woman president in Asia, in South Asia. And in 2001, the Filipino people received an award from the Nobel Peace Prize Laureates Foundation and the Center for Global Nonviolence for the courageous example of people power as a living example, as an example of living democracy. Many people, even up to now, after 3 or 4 decades of the people power in the Philippines, many countries and peoples have tried to do similar things, and many are successful, many have not been so successful. But the people power in the Philippines, the 1986 people power revolution did not sprout out like mushroom overnight. It took years and years of preparation of those who were involved in the social movements, as well as of those who were in the university, the so-called intelligentsia, where at that point in time, between 1980s and 86, the University of the Philippines and some other universities were supposed to be the seedbed of revolutionary ideas. At that time, the non-government organizations and people's organizations were then actively working either above ground or underground. And of course, when Marcos left the country, all of those who were underground, except for, of course, the official Communist Party of the Philippines, all of those underground have surfaced and tried to work with government. Unfortunately, there were many invested interests in the new government. So even if we were able to depose one leader, there's no guarantee that new leaders will bring about more spaces for democracy. Unless, of course, there is a change in the paradigm, there is a change in the development models that the country would pursue for the benefit of all and not just for the benefit of the elites that have taken over. Today we witness the makings of a maturing and enduring social and political movements in the Philippines. But as I mentioned earlier, the social movement in the Philippines took a long, long time to mature. I remember when I was a university student in the 60s, I was already a member of the League of Filipino Students, and that was one of the earliest movements of Filipino students who were collaborating with university professors, journalists, and members of peasant organizations, farmers organizations, urban poor organizations. And there we were taught nonviolent protests. We were taught how to challenge nonviolently. And we had sit-ins and sit-ins on how to challenge the system in a nonviolent way. Of course, we were not always successful. We were faced with water cannons most of the time. But at that time, the elders were there in front of us and the younger ones were behind. Fortunately, the elders who were not so resistant to water cannons were being backed up by the younger ones behind. And of course, there was an advantage of the older being in front because Marcos didn't dare to arrest them. Marcos did not dare to put them in prison at that time because they were senators, they were members of legislators, and so they had followings, which of course the president knew he would become too unpopular if he had put them all if he had incarcerated all of them. But eventually he did, and that started his downfall. The work of peace educators in all levels of schooling may not be as visible as participating in peace rallies, peace negotiations, and other forms of nonviolent action. But as practitioners of such visible peace-building actions will admit, education is necessary to help in the reconstruction and reformation of consciousness that enhance knowledge, values, and competencies or skills consistent with a more peaceful world. Now, I'd like to talk about peace that is learned beyond the classroom. Many of us, we were then peace educators in the university level, but the peace education that we had in the university level went beyond the classroom. And that is why Leban and I and Suihin, we wrote a book. We wrote a chapter in the book, which is peace education from the grassroots, where Leban narrated his stories about peace education that he did in the grassroots, and we also had our stories of empowerment of educators and students in the university level in order to engage not only intellectually, to be part of the peace education movement in the university. It is not enough to engage intellectually. Intellectual discussions do not lead anything more than just churning publications and publications getting published in peer-reviewed journals. Well and good, you get promoted and you become a full professor. But in the social movement, they don't ask you whether you are an assistant professor or an associate professor or a full professor. Your credentials are what you do. And so I'd like to share some of the things that professors in the academy have done beyond the classroom. And we work in partnership with local non-government organizations, providing meaningful experience for students, coordinating education, coordinating exposure of graduate students, immersion in marginalized communities so that they came out with theses and dissertations that benefited not only the student researching, but more so the participants of in their research. And so our students early on were told or agreed that all those who participated in their research were not research subjects. We never called our participants in our research, we never called them research subjects. We called them research participants. And whenever we published anything, they were co-authors. They were not assistant, they were co-authors. And in that way, the ownership does not belong to the university professor. It is a collective effort of students and university professors. And they would go together, we would go together, cross rivers, go up mountains, and look at social organic farming, and make use of all the available traditional knowledge and tools that are available in the community so that the theses and dissertations of our students are not just to decorate the libraries in most of the universities. But there are also exemplars of peace agents not within the academy, because we work with several, and I can just give you a few examples. For example, instead of languishing in refugee camps, refugees in the conflict zones between the military and the insurgents, they decided to build their own zones of peace, and there are students and priests working the social movements who help the refugees put up the zones of peace. So in the Philippines, we have 12 zones of peace, and they are put up by ordinary citizens, they are put up by NGO workers, they are assisted by students. And although some of the zones of peace, some of them have folded up because there are two problems in zones of peace. One is sustainability in terms of livelihood of the people in the zone of peace, and the other is co-optation, when either the government or the insurgency group finally get them to side with either group. That way, some of the zones of peace were not very successful. Now, we have a couple more examples. We have, okay, a couple more examples.
Yeah.
One is a granddaughter of a senator, and she comes from an upper middle class family, but she decided to join the mass movement, and so she is currently now involved with the Gaston Ortigas Institute for Peace, working for the indigenous people and working for the urban poor. She has denied herself all the pleasures of middle class, upper middle class, in order to join the social movement. And my last example is we have Arminda, who is, her father is one of the vigilantes that have been killing the Muslims during the conflict in Mindanao. But she decided to work with the Muslims and the Christians in the dialogue, so that eventually the father finally put down her guns and opened up for dialogue with the Christians and the Muslims. And so we have many examples. As I said earlier, we have crossed rivers and mountains, and that is the only way you can be an agent for peace. Engage not only intellectually, engage with the heart.
I really needed to stop her. It's so exciting and an honor to hear you speak, Virginia, and I'm sorry to have to stop you. Our next speaker is